I believe is the 12th episode of Voices of Revival, and I am very excited for the guest that we are joined with today. We are joined by today, English, not my strong suit, right? We are joined by today Brady Shearer from ProChurch Tools. I'm very excited to have Brady on this call with us today and kind of get the chance to pick his brain a little bit. Brady, for those who do not know you and are not familiar with ProChurch Tools, would you care to say hi and introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for the invite, Bradley. So my name's Brady. I live in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, Canada. I run a company called ProChurch Tools. We say that we help churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. So we kicked off the company roughly 10 years ago, just me in my one-bedroom apartment, newly married, teaching churches, hey, here's how to start your Facebook page. Here's how to make a video. Social media, you should probably learn how to manage that. I was learning all these things myself as a media director. Figured, hey, if I'm going to be in charge with these things as a young person, I imagine some of my friends and other folks my age out there will be as well. And I just started teaching everything that I was learning. So started a YouTube channel about a decade ago, podcast, a blog, and then as the platform grew, so did the company. And now we have roughly 30 employees, a few different locations, one stateside, one in Canada, a bunch of remote employees as well. We have a software platform called Nucleus. That's kind of our primary platform, primary product. And then we also work directly with churches, helping them with their social media at socialsermons.com. But what we've always done and will continue to do is jumping on podcasts like this, creating free content, helping churches, like we say, navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years.
Brady, I how do I say this? I believe that the work you do is incredibly important, and the message at the core of what you're doing, the heart behind everything you're doing. I I, I think you're tackling something that doesn't get the attention that it is deserved. Something that in the mix of your content and in the mix of everything that you do, something that you kind of allude to is this ideal, right? That the like our church services, right? Like it's what, like an hour, 2 hours, an hour a week, right? And for majority of ministries, like it's all about that time. It's all about that space. But there are so many hours within the week that are missed and neglected. And what is it? 167? Is that the number?
Yeah, if your
167
Sunday
hours.
service is about 1 hour, yeah.
So there's 167 hours through the course of the rest of the week. What are you doing in the mix of that time, right? So something that like I always try and look at with media is something that I'm passionate about, right? Something that I always try and like look at it like um, I, I don't know the best way to explain this. I always kind of struggle to explain this thought. Um, but to me, it feels like media within the Christian space, right? Like we do our thing and then we try and fit the media in, right? Like we try and force it in the mix of like what we're doing. What would it look like though if we put more priority on it? What would it look like if like our lens of how we approach media wasn't how do we make it fit into what we're doing, but how can we go about it in a way where we're strategically capitalizing on that 167 hours throughout the week? What, in your opinion and in your thought, right? What do you think like the most important thing that a corporate body, a church body could do to capitalize on that time outside of the 1 hour on Sundays?
I think the first step is making sure that we're clear with our churches and our leadership. We're not suggesting that the 167 hours beyond Sunday service are meant to be a replacement for in-person community. And I think this is something folks hear about me and what I do, or or anyone that's an advocate for digital ministry, and they think, oh, you're trying to say that we don't need to meet in person, which couldn't be farther from the truth. What we can do in person via community and, an incarnated body of believers is something that is irreplaceable and something that digital is not meant to, stand in for. What is also true, though, is that what we do online is something that is 100% unique from what we can do in person. It works both ways. What's amazing about the time that we live in now is that we are able to access the folks that are connected to our church, but also people well beyond our church's influence and reach right now, and share the good news with them and reach them where they are and encourage them to engage in spiritual practice. And we don't only need to meet in person. And when these things are at their best, they're working in harmony together, and they're each thriving within the strengths and the things that only they can do in person and online together. A byproduct of that, or kind of dovetailing off of that, is understanding the mission of your church and then how we can use these digital tools to help fulfill the mission. We're not using social media because, I'm saying so, or because someone else said so, or because we think social media is important. We're doing it because of how it can help us fulfill our church's mission. At the end of the day, we as churches exist to help share the good news, to encourage life change, to help people love God, love others, make disciples. And so, how can we use digital platforms? How can we use social media tools to help accomplish that mission? And that's always a great place to start, because if folks typically church leaders are older, if it's something that's new to them, if it's something that's foreign, it can be intimidating. It can be hard to embrace, because these folks, they've been doing ministry for their whole lives, Bradley, and now we're coming in, these young folks, we're like, hey, you need to engage these new tools. And like, hey, we've done ministry fine for 4 decades, let's say, and now we all need to change. And so what I always say is, it's mission over method. We're not trying to change the mission of the church. The mission is the constant. But in this biggest communication shift in 500 years, we are going to have to engage new methods to see that same mission fulfilled.
You use the language of the biggest communication shift in 500 years, and I think that is language outside of I guess the norm within Christian spaces, right? Like, it's not something that we think about, and I think it's not something that like a lot of people think about at all. But when you really kind of break things down and you really look at things, like, it's true. Like, the communication shift that we have seen with like going from like internet to like the social media boom, I guess you would say, like the communication shift has been dramatic. Like, we are able, like, you are up in Canada, correct? Like, you're up in Canada. I'm here in Ohio. We're sitting side by side virtually having a discussion, and like the reach that social creates, right? It is an entirely different ball field. A struggle that I have found is, how do you like how do you go about it in a way where like you can like show people that this communication shift has taken place. Like, I think about like the area where I am at, right? Like, there are all kinds of amazing churches that I know in my area, and I can maybe think of two churches in the mix of like Southeast Ohio or Southwest Ohio, right? I'm in Southwest Ohio, a little bit north of Cincinnati. Southwest Ohio, I can think of maybe two churches that I can think of that are really tackling this communication shift, this greatest communication shift, well, right? Really capitalizing on everything in front of us. How would you communicate to, if you're in a spot, right, and there's leadership above you that aren't seeing the importance of the communication shift? How would you go about kind of trying to navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to look around into every single industry and see how disruptive the internet and digital tools have been. And churches are not immune to that disruption. You're in Ohio. I spent a lot of time growing up playing basketball in Ohio. I was on a traveling team, and Ohio's only 4 to 6 hours from me. Depending on what part that you're visiting. And when I was a kid, and my dad and I would drive down to play basketball in Ohio for these tournaments, what would we do? We'd go onto MapQuest and print out, 37 pages, staple them together, and then I'm in the front seat going, okay, we're, here, we're getting on this interstate, we got to take this exit, we're going to Lima, whatever it might be. And those that was my lifetime. I'm 32. I'm not old. And when I was, 10, 12, 14 years old, those were the tools that we were using to get around. And just think about the tools that exist and are so pervasive in our everyday life that did not even exist prior to 2005. YouTube and Google Maps are both roughly around then. Spotify, Airbnb, Dropbox, every social platform. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, formerly known as TikTok, um, all the streaming platforms. So TV just like doesn't exist in the way that it once did whatsoever. These are all industries. Like music is just free now. All music is accessible for like $9. I was a teenager buying CDs. Like the pace of change is truly hard to comprehend when you're kind of in the middle of it. You take a step back and you observe how much has changed. And then you consider, oh, just throw in a once in a lifetime pandemic in there as well that really accelerated this pace of change. And you can see how disruptive this period has been, and we're still just in the very beginning of it. Obviously artificial intelligence is having this big moment now, and what does that portend for the next decade? A lot of that remains to be seen. I don't think churches at this point are exactly unconvinced that a big communication shift is upon us. I think there's a lot, though, of paralysis, this feeling of like, well, how do we as in person ministries use these tools to substantively fulfill our mission and to affect life change and to reach our local area? I think there is kind of a knowledge gap. And then there's also, probably more importantly, a time, resources, and money gap. You serve in church, you're wearing a lot of different hats. There are so many things that you need to take care of, responsibilities that need to be cared for, and things that need to be done. And you add in this social thing, this internet thing. Oh, we have to have a website, of course, but also social. Which platform should we be on? How do we do it? Wait, we have to post every single week? Like, that's this huge new burden and thing to do. And so a lot of it, usually it's two things. Either these churches don't fully understand how to take their mission and see it fulfilled online. How can we use online tools to help move the mission forward? Or, yeah, I know what I need to do. I just don't have time to do it.
Yeah. I think you hit on a lot of phenomenal things there. You kind of alluded to like um, you alluded to like churches see it, but like seeing it and capitalizing on it are two different things. And that strikes to me a conversation I recently had. I recently had a guy, and he was telling me that during the pandemic, like the church that the guy's a part of, they invested like $6,000 into upgrading a recording space for video content, and then he basically turns around and says, "But we haven't done anything with it at all." Like they invested all these resources into this thing, and they haven't done anything at all with it. I think when you really look at things, I think it is easy to say, um, it is easy to see that the communication shift is taking place, and we need to go about things different. But capitalizing and seeing it are two different things. You also hit on that you traveled around Ohio when you were traveling in basketball, which is I think an excellent segue into I think you need to kind of pivot on your NFL allegiance, Brady. So I'll buy you a Burrow jersey and I'll mail it to you. Okay, like it's an easy conversion for you, right? Right.
I mean, it's tough because I have an NFC team that I cheer for, the 49ers. I started cheering for them 2011 when I was living on the west coast of Canada, so it felt aligned at that point. I am now, on the East Coast. I'm only 30 minutes from Buffalo, though. So if I had to choose my allegiance, I feel like I'd have to do it based on proximity. I don't know how I could just jump to Buffalo and 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 then kind of skip over it to Cincinnati. I don't know. That feels improper.
I hear the team in Buffalo's not that good. I hear that team's not that good. So yeah.
I hear that both them and the Bengals have a combined long history of not quite finishing the job once they get to the Super Bowl. Perhaps that's something they have in common.
Well, I mean that's gonna change this year. So I mean, like if you're gonna like you got the history in Ohio, you're on the eastern part of Canada. So I think like it's an easy transition. You can play into like traveling in Ohio. So I think it's the wise thing to do. Um, but yeah, you also in the mix of kind of your discourse there. You talked about something that I feel like so there's layers to this. Okay, so like we need to be capitalizing on media. We need to be using those tools, but there is a new tool that is beginning to emerge. And a lot of people have not taken notice of it at all. I mentioned how I think there are two churches in my region that do media well. I had a discussion with like the media guy of one of these two churches recently, and I'm like, "Hey, AI, are you doing anything with it?" And like he's absolutely this guy's absolutely killing the media, but he wasn't doing anything with AI. You alluded to AI being like AI being this emerging thing, and at this point in like the emergence of AI, I feel like a lot of people kind of look at it with taboo, right? Like it's a bad thing, don't touch it. Um, I haven't seen a lot of like positive like takes on it and responses to it. What's your take on it? I
Yeah,
will
so
say,
we
I
did a
will
post.
say, oh, sorry for cutting you off there. I will say, I personally do use ChatGPT quite often. I also use another graphic spot quite often. I think there's a lot of practical uses. I think there are improper uses of it and practical uses of it. But yeah, what's your thought on AI?
Yeah, I'm pretty mad at AI right now. I did my fantasy football draft yesterday, and testing the waters with the Bengals. I took Jamar Chase, number 3 overall pick in the draft, my first round pick, and then I get an email from Yahoo Sports, and it says, "Here's your report card generated by AI," and they gave me an F. And it was Chat GPT who was like, I don't know what this guy's thinking, but he's shooting for the moon. What a foolish draft this was. So yeah, I got a little bitter taste in my mouth. More seriously, we did a post over on Instagram, just my name at Brady Shearer a few weeks ago, and it was a carousel post called "Rules for AI Your Church Should Follow." And basically, the idea was, hey, if you do plan on using AI in your church, it's useful to have kind of like a set of parameters for how you're going to engage with it. And they're not complicated. The first one is, why would we be using AI? And to me, the answer is that AI can be a useful shortcut. And in that respect, I'm a video editor. I'm a photo editor. We've been using AI for a very long time because there are noise reduction tools inside of Lightroom, inside of Photoshop that are intelligence based. When I first started making videos for my church, 2010, I had a Canon T3i camera. And using that camera, I could not capture good looking footage unless it was daytime or the room was perfectly lit. The room I'm in right now, we're in our studio right now. There are 7 lights, like everything is evenly lit. My camera back then could probably do okay in this. But if there was low light, if there was a non advantageous lighting condition, like let's say maybe a sanctuary for a church, there was no hope for that camera. It didn't matter what lens I had, the tech just wasn't there yet. Nowadays, I can bring in footage like that that's incredibly noisy and use a noise reduction tool inside of DaVinci Resolve, the video editing tool I use, or Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop, and they can intelligently remove the noise in that specific composition. That's AI. And these tools have been around for a very long time. And so if we're using it as a useful shortcut, I think that's an okay thing. The second rule is what we say to churches as a helpful parameter is that we will not use AI as our exclusive source, meaning we are not going to ask AI to like come up with something for us from scratch. But what I might do is I might write a paragraph for my church's about page on our website. I might load that up into copy.ai or jasper.ai or ChatGPT, whatever you might use, and say, hey, can you take this like sentence about our church and expound on it to create a paragraph for an about us page on a church website? I'm not asking it to come up with something new. I'm just asking it to rewrite something that's already there, and then I'll proofread before I publish the final thing. One more use case we used AI for was we were making a website for a church, and they had these really old um, staff photos. And the problem was that they didn't have the source, the originals. I'm sure they were good photos, but all they had were the downloads from their previous website. And the photos had already been cropped into a circle. But in this new website that we were building, then we needed to have photos that would fit in a square or a rectangle container. And they're like, well, we can't hire a new photographer. We don't have this kind of money. And like, no, none of us know what we're doing. So I could have just had them take their phone, and film and shoot some photos in an area. Phones are pretty good with this nowadays. But what I did before that was I downloaded the Photoshop beta and I was experimenting with generative fill, where basically you can tell Photoshop, say, hey, we need this square photo, or pardon me, circular photo to be a square photo. And then it will just kind of fill in the space around it. So we weren't asking it to come up with something from scratch, like let's say Mid Journey. We were saying, hey, we have this source image. We just need you to kind of fill in the edges of the container. And that wouldn't have been possible, 2 years ago. And it did an amazing job. Now, it did kind of create these really scary hands on these pastors, and you can see this video on our Instagram. So I did have to crop the hands out, but we were able to basically restore these images to their original, what would have almost certainly been what the photographer had shot, but they did not have access to anymore. And so those fall within those parameters, right? We're not going to use AI as our exclusive source, and we're going to use it as a useful shortcut. Working within those parameters, AI can be an incredibly useful tool for speeding up your workflow, and not in a way that you're asking it to create some, hey, I need a citation for a sermon. Can you find a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien about love? There have been cases that have been proved already where AI has completely lied. Um, if you search in Google for, I think it was a California legal case where a lawyer had asked AI to track down, and this was in the New York Times, it was everywhere. The lawyer asked AI to track down citations from a previous case to prove something in their case. And the AI was like, yeah, here's the citation. And so then they brought that to discovery, and the opposing lawyers on the other side were like, I don't know what this case is. This case doesn't exist. And they found out, oh, ChatGPT just made it up. And so, that is outside of the parameters of what we would recommend, because I do not think that the AIs are trustworthy for that. But like most things in life, it doesn't need to be binary. We either reject something altogether or we embrace it indiscriminately. Neither of those are going to be the healthiest choice, leading to the best outcomes. We have a set of parameters, a little bit of policy. We can use these tools to help, again, fulfill our mission. That's the only reason we're trying to do this, and make use of the fact that we don't have as many resources as maybe we would like.
I like it. I like it. Did you see? I forget where it was, but somewhere they had like a church service that was completely ran by AI. Have you seen that?
I don't think so.
I seen a video recently. I'll have to see if I can find that. But basically, like they everything was AI. Like I think there was music, it was done AI. And then they had like a AI avatar up on a big screen, and they had the AI avatar give a message. So
Okay,
yeah,
yes, I did see this one. This was all in virtual reality.
no, it wasn't virtual reality. It was a physical church, and like up on the pulpit, instead of having a minister, there's a big screen, and they had the chatbot avatar up on the screen, and it gave an audio sermon through like the speakers.
Oh, fascinating.
I'll see if I can find it and I'll send it to you afterwards. But um, definitely, I would say improper use. For me, what it comes down to with AI, um, like I feel like as we go forth and we're delivering the message, always like what we're delivering should be born of the Holy Spirit. It should be born of like where God leads, right? And the AI could easily become an alternative to that, like, and I think that kind of goes down to what you were talking about, how like you would write the paragraph and then you would upload it and allow the AI to refine it, right? So you were still doing the work, you were still like allowing like space for Holy Spirit to lead. um AI is not an alternative though. For me, I mentioned I use ChatGPT a lot. listen, I'm not the best writer, okay? Like, I'm just going to say that. I'm not the best writer. My grammar's not always perfect. My spelling's not always perfect. So if I write something, I'll take it and I'll like put a prompt in front of it, something like, hey, I wrote this blog. Can you refine it for me? Check for grammar and proper spelling and run it through ChatGPT, refines it, and usually good to go. Though, like you mentioned, go through and clean it up because it's not always perfect. So, um, yeah. Um, what do you, in the mix of everything you see going on? What are some of your biggest concerns with kind of with how churches approach this communication shift? What do you think some of your biggest concerns are?
Well, I think a big one has to do with just the age of folks that are being kind of empowered within churches. And this isn't meant to be discriminatory to older leaders at all. It's more of a practical assessment. Um, most senior leaders in churches are 60 plus in America on average. And what that means is that they are not digital natives, and so it can be challenging, though not impossible. And I do applaud the older leaders that have like learned new skills just as if that they were, in their 20s, 30s, or 40s. But for the most part, it's difficult for those people to learn these skills because they didn't grow up with it, right? We have this huge advantage of Facebook came out when I was in 10th grade. And so I came from an analog world. I had a rotary phone in my house growing up. And then I was a teenager and adolescent through social platforms becoming as popular as they are. And now I'm an adult who understands kind of both worlds. And so that's, a tremendous advantage. It's basically like being able to speak two languages. And if we take that kind of analogy and extend it, let's imagine, a senior leader that didn't grow up with this thing. Maybe they're only fluent in like a singular language. And they can go the extra steps and learn that second language. And if that is what they want to pursue, more power to them. But churches often have a ton of people in their midst who have these skills and just need to be empowered to take advantage of them. That's kind of my story. I was in school studying to be a student pastor. I have my degree in theology. That's kind of what I went to school for. And in my second year, I was appointed to be the media director at a brand new church plant. And I didn't really have too many skills at the time, but I was younger and they saw, kind of fiery passion within me. And my pastor just gave me this camera and he's like, hey, go make some videos for this church. And I just started kind of learning on the fly. I remember going to an intersection. We were filming this vision video. It was around September, 14 years ago at this time. And I was wanted to film some of the area around our church to kind of like create these establishing shots, these time lapses, like, hey, here's the community that we're serving. And I didn't even have a tripod at the time, Bradley. So I take my Canon T3i and I go to the corner of this intersection near our church and I kind of like just place it on this electrical box. And I'm just shooting photos of this intersection. And it must have been like 5 minutes. And I'm shooting with my roommate in college who eventually became the very first employee at our company. And I'm shooting these photos and I hear the wheep of the police officers that just pulled up. And they come out and they're like, why are you taking photos of these people in their cars? And I was like, oh, I'm making a video for my church. And they're like, you really shouldn't do this. You should go home. And what's interesting about that is like, there was nothing that was wrong about what I was doing, but it was such a foreign thing to see like kids with these cameras shooting photos like out in public. Like now that's so common. Like obviously we know the laws and it's also just culturally acceptable. It's not even foreign whatsoever. But at that time it was so weird. And I remember going home being like, I'm never gonna make it. I'm never gonna be able to do this job. Like that was so uncomfortable. The police being like, go home, take your camera and go home. And uh, but the point was is that senior leader, rather than saying I'm going to learn all this myself, empowered me. One of the questions that we get a lot from churches is like, well, what should we do for youth ministry? And I say, the best churches that are doing youth ministry and doing that for social, they just let their students kind of create content. And they just kind of they do that and they're led by the senior leaders and the senior leaders are there to help teach them digital hygiene and making sure that they're being safe online and using these tools and not letting these tools use them. But it becomes this amazing bonding experience in these student ministries where they're working to like create content. And that's a pastime of young people the same way that my youth group did, mini golf and laser tag and, basketball night. Still doing those things in youth groups today, but creating content and that kind of creative expression is also something that is very familiar to teenagers, but also now young adults. Young adults that are like have kids now, like people like me, like 30-year-olds with families and stuff. Like we're also capable, and so I think one of the easiest ways for churches to kind of begin bridging this gap is to reach out to different age groups and different generations, or if you're wanting to learn these skills yourself, more power to you. Like I said, like that's why we have our weekly podcast, we have our YouTube channel, we have all this free content to help you learn these skills, because everyone is capable of learning these skills at any age if we have the right mindset and the desire to learn them.
So there's a lot there that we could unpack. Something that stuck out to me, and I think it stuck out to me from just kind of listening to a lot of your podcasts and a lot of your material in the past. Um, you talked about how you went out with a camera and you were taking pictures of your actual community. Um, I believe I got this from you, Brady, right? I believe this is something that you've instilled in me over the years. But something that drives me nuts is when I hop on a church website and the pictures I look at, they're not of the church. They're not of the people. It has nothing to do with the churches. It's like stock images that they've like gotten from somewhere else. There's this one church I can think of in my area. It's an amazing church. They do all kinds of stuff well. But when you go, last time I looked, it might not be the same now, but last time I looked, when you go to their like website page, it's this like really cool picture of like multiple interstates kind of like passing over each other, I guess. But like this interstate, like I don't know why it's there. Like I've never seen this interstate before, and it's nowhere's near our area. Um,
Oh,
so I don't understand it. Um, our what we're doing, like let's show our people, right? Let's show our community. The pictures you use, like why aren't we using pictures of our churches? Why aren't we using pictures of the people in our churches? Like the majority of, like I find it very rare in my area to see like the actual images that a church use on their website actually be of their church. Like I don't understand why that's a weird thing. That should be a common thing, right? And then I mentioned how like there's a couple churches in my area that I feel really do media well. One of them in particular, the majority of what they do is just post pictures. Like they've got a very skilled photographer, and like every week, like they drop all kinds of like really awesome pictures through the week of like their gathering. And the same church, you'll probably like this, Brady. Their platform, the backdrop of their platform. I've never seen another church do this. Maybe you have, but like it's really cool. The backdrop of their platform. It is basically like they had a drone, I guess, and it took a picture of the cityscape around like where they have their gathering, and it's just like a really like blown up picture of this skyline of the area that they're in. Like it's super cool.
and let's talk about like why people, right? Like if someone's listening or watching, they're like, okay, like why do people matter? And there's a very important reason. Think about the substance of church. What do we do? Well, we deal with existential matters of faith and life and eternity and purpose, things that are sometimes difficult to quantify. But at the end of the day, what we do is about people, right? Like it's about connecting people to other people. It's about connecting people to Jesus. And so the best way to visualize what our churches do is via people, our community of believers. There's really no way to show a photo of God. You could put in symbols and things like that, but what's going to be so much more powerful is the community of believers that go to your church. I liken it to, imagine there was a new restaurant in your community that you wanted to check out, and you saw, oh, this is a hamburger restaurant, and you're looking on their website or on their social platforms, and like there's a beautiful photo of a hamburger. You're like, oh wow, that looks great. Let's go there and have that. And then you go there, and they serve you the burger, and it looks nothing like what you saw on their website or social platform. And you go like, "What? I thought your burger like had a brioche bun. I thought it had like bacon. I thought it had, you know, this kind of cheese. Like this doesn't look anything like that." And then the server looks at you and goes, that photo, that no, that wasn't our burger. That was from like, that's from Getty Images. That was from Unsplash. That was a stock photo we found on Google Photos. That wasn't our burger." You'd be like, "What? That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Like, why would you show a photo of, of something that wasn't yours?" And yet, churches are using stock photos of people that don't go to their church, perhaps posing with a certain level of diversity that their church congregation maybe doesn't reflect. That's the worst kind of offense, but it's also, you use the interstate or you use a photo of a field, you use, a sunrise. Like, yeah, those are all fine, like maybe tangentially related to maybe the Christian life and experience, but there's nothing that replaces the real people in your church. It's the best representation. You've probably heard it in church. Like, the church isn't the four walls, the church is the people. Well, if that is what we believe, then our website, our social platforms, our visuals should reflect that conviction. And this used to be somewhat difficult. When I started in church doing this, like you had to have maybe a professional photographer to come in. Nowadays, every single one of us with a phone can create photos that are superior to what professionals, most of them, had in their pockets 10, 15 years ago. And what that means is that anyone can take photos that maybe are not going to rival what a professional can do. I would never say that, but they can take photos that are really great and can accomplish what we're discussing here, even if you're not someone that knows what they're doing with photography. You can point and shoot, put it on portrait mode so it blurs out the background, take some photos in the lobby as people are kind of meeting before service begins. People are smiling, people are, having a good time. That is the lifeblood of our church. What makes it so special? You talked about AI. You talked about what I mentioned the pandemic. What about church in culture is so valuable? People meeting with other people, having a community that you can rely on, a community that is intergenerational, is from different socioeconomic backgrounds, is from different ethnic backgrounds. That doesn't exist in culture. Do you know how often I would rub shoulders with someone who's my grandma's age that isn't my grandma? Maybe on my morning walk because I live in an area of a lot of seniors and I wave to them. Most of the time, you're not going to see teenagers and seniors in the same room if they're not related. In church, you do. It's what's so special about what our congregations are. And so let's take that idea and how can we visually represent it? That is kind of the missional idea behind what we're suggesting.
Yeah, yeah. You took some time and you talked about like senior leaders empowering people for this stuff. On the topic of like photographers, like you alluded to how like we all have like our phones and our phones are like high quality cameras. The advancement of cameras within phones is phenomenal. Phones are great. However, I would say a professional photographer definitely is much better than a average Joe with their camera. Um, I don't think coming across a skilled photographer though is as hard as you might first think it is. Like I am an introvert, right? I'll be honest with you, Brady. I don't like talking to people. Okay, right? People are the worst. So I go out of my way to slide in, slide out, and not engage with people. Okay, I shouldn't, but it's what I do. And in the mix of all my introvertness, I know quite a few skilled photographers, right? Like I feel like they're everywhere, right? If you made a post on Facebook being like, "Hey, I need a professional photographer. Anyone know anybody?" Like you're probably gonna get like a dozen recommendations. Talking about senior leadership empowering photographers, I think senior leadership might be surprised if they said from the pulpit or like video weekly announcement video or whatever, "Hey, we're looking for a photographer within the church. Does anybody know anybody?" Right? I think they might be surprised with the response that they get.
Yeah, and that gets to what we were saying earlier, right? Like, instead of feeling we have to do everything ourselves, there are a lot of very capable people in our congregation that are more than ready and willing to share their gifts.
Yeah. Something that you kind of you kind of touched on pretty quick early on. We didn't really dive into it, and I don't think we've talked about it too much. You talked about how like you referenced the age of senior leadership, and you also kind of reference like all the different platforms that there are. And you kind of alluded to how sometimes like churches can question like what platform should we be focusing on. And if you look at the platforms, like there's definitely like each of the platforms they do better, they do different with various age groups. What is your thought on how we should be approaching the amount of different platforms that there are?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, it's always best to kind of go deep on one platform before expanding to more than one. With that being said, we are in a really interesting time with social platforms because they're all kind of aligning and preferring the same type of content. It was popularized on TikTok, but vertical video now is the preferred content medium of choice across virtually every platform. Even YouTube, that still has a larger emphasis on horizontal video, is really for the first time in a long time integrating this new feature, which is, hey, we want short form vertical content on our platforms as well. It's a really advantageous spot to be in because for the first era of social media, what we call the social graph era of social, you would have to create unique content for every platform because they all had their different kind of taste, their different culture, their different creative expressions. Now you can create one video, upload it to YouTube Shorts, to Instagram Reels, to Facebook Reels, to Twitter/X, and also to TikTok. And that's not considered like a compromise. Like, oh, I could be doing each of these platforms better if I was emphasizing their own unique differences. No, like that's actually what you should be doing. And so kind of get your cake and eat it too in that respect. But we're also seeing in this new era of social that I like to call the discovery era, which is in respect to the new algorithms that are not necessarily recommending content based on a chronological feed or even the friends and family members you're connected to, but instead your viewing habits and personal interests. Is that it's again really advantageous for churches because we have this weekly sermon that our senior leadership is creating that we can repurpose for all of these social platforms. But there's this stratification on social as well. And what I mean by that is, when I was younger and Facebook came out, we all the kids jumped on it. And then Instagram came out, we all jumped on it. And before that, Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube, TikTok, you would just join every new platform as they came. We're starting to see the stratification of social platforms. And what I mean by that is that, boomers kind of joined Facebook when their kids did, or within 5 years, 10 years of when their kids did, but they kind of stayed there. And millennials, my generation, we kind of like Instagram kind of became our platform of choice. And Gen Z, TikTok is kind of their platform of choice. And in Gen Alpha, the generation that's coming up after Gen Z, they're kind of starting on YouTube Shorts, which is also interesting. And so this stratification of social platforms is you're seeing generations in the same way with musical taste and fashion taste. Say, oh, that's how my parents dress, or that's the kind of music they listen to. We're seeing the same thing with social. There are these like different flavors, and they're almost marked by age groups per generation. So when it comes to choosing which platform your church should be on, it can be as simple as what is the age group you want to reach, and or what is your current demographic makeup of your existing congregation? Where are those people? And then going to be where those people are.
Yeah, very good answer. Very good answer. Brady, I am incredibly appreciative of your time, and I'm incredibly appreciative of you taking the time to be here on this show with us as we prepare to wrap up. What would you say, right? If there was, we kind of spent some time talking about like the like the people who like see the need but they're not really capitalizing on things. We took some time to talk about like taking steps to empower those around us. What would you say to the Christian leader who recognizes there is a need in the mix of all of this? Like they've recognized it, but like they really haven't taken the steps to really empower anybody, and they're in a spot where they can empower people. As we kind of wrap up, what would you say to that person?
I mean, there's really nothing that can replace you actually posting content, you actually building a website, you actually taking the photos and learning these skills. And what we say is like getting in the trenches and just doing the work. It's kind of like you can read about what it's like to do a deadlift or what it's like to do a push up or what it's like to run a marathon. Like until you get out and you pick up that bar or you pick up that weight or you start, running down the street, you can only learn so much. You have to actually do it. You have to get in the trenches. And so what we see is a lot of churches kind of sitting on the sideline, standing on the sideline, like unwilling to like really take the risk. We've begun doing more podcast episodes, long form, where we talk with churches that have taken the advice that we've shared over the years and have implemented it to see dramatic life change in their local congregations. We did one on our show, the ProChurch Tools show, a couple weeks ago with this small church plant. Um, and they were about 40 people 5 years ago. Today, they're 250, and 60% of their new visitors come from social media. We did one last week with another church plant this in Arizona, and they are meeting in a middle school, and they're about 120 people, and half of their growth since the pandemic has been through social media because of their efforts. I talked with a church last week, and their episode goes out this Wednesday, so 2 days from now, August 30th, depending on when you might be listening or watching this. And that church is in Texas. They were 90 people when they launched 8 years ago. Today they're 1,900, and they have like a 250,000 followers on TikTok, more approaching 100,000 on Instagram, just taking their sermons that are already recorded and repurposing them for social. So they're sharing the good news to hundreds of thousands, literally millions of people. But then they're also, because all of these discovery algorithms have this local component to them, reaching their like little town where they are ministering in as well. And so what do I say to those churches? All of them in our conversations at one point said, Brady, I watched your video or I listened to your podcast. And I said, okay, I'm just going to go do it. One of the churches, 5 years of posting consistently every single week. And they didn't really see any dramatic growth until finally, like it took off like crazy. And that's how kind of this all works. You just do the right thing bit by bit consistently, and it can dramatically affect your church, your local community. And because of that, like people's eternal destination and what that means for their families and generations to come after that. It can make such a big difference. And so the reason we've been highlighting these stories is to build faith in people that are like, okay, but like it's not working for me yet, or what does it actually mean for an actual church? And so I encourage people to kind of listen to those stories, hear what people on the front lines are doing in the trenches, and then if you need help learning the skills and picking up the best practices, that's what our content is for. And so together they kind of make a really good combination.
Very nice. If you're watching, and if you are not already following Brady and everything that he's doing, you need to be. So I will drop all that information in the description below. Brady, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate it. You have been an incredible blessing to my life over the years. So I thank you for your dedication. Everyone watching, thank you so much. Peace.